Some connections feel like coincidence until they dawn. Single quotes T.it was just supposed to be a call. Zara's thumb hovered over her phone screen, scrolling through contacts in a rush. The evening had been long, and she needed to talk to anyone who could make her laugh after the kind of day that drains your soul. She tapped the name, lifted the phone to her ear, and waited. Hello, came the voice on the other end. But it wasn't familiar. Zara blinked. Saba? A pause, then a low chuckle. Not unless I've changed my name and gender overnight. I think you dialed the wrong number. She groaned softly, embarrassed. Oh wow, I'm so sorry. I thought I was calling my friend. No worries, he said, amusement in his tone. Though, I have to say, it's not every day I get mistaken for a girl named Saba. Zara laughed despite herself, the tension in her chest easing slightly. There was something about his voice, deep, calm, curious, that made her pause before ending the call. I'm Zara, by the way, she said, surprising even herself. Adil, he replied. Nice to meet you. Accidentally. And that's how it began. What was supposed to be a 20-second apology turned into 20 minutes. Then 40, then an hour. The conversation meandered from awkward introductions to favorite books, from annoying co-workers to childhood memories. It wasn't forced. It didn't feel like strangers talking. It felt like two souls brushing past each other in the middle of the chaos and deciding quietly not to walk away just yet. Zara lay back against her pillow, phone pressed to her ear, eyes staring at the ceiling. Adil's voice had a rhythm to it, like he was thinking before he spoke, like he actually listened. So, he said after a while, do you always call the wrong number when you need someone to talk to? She grinned. Only when the universe decides to be dramatic. He laughed. Well, lucky me then. Neither of them wanted to admit how much they needed that call. Zara didn't say that her best friend had moved away last month and that silence had been her closest companion since. Adil didn't mention the loneliness of living in a city that moved too fast and felt too cold. Instead, they just kept talking about little things, safe things. Do you believe in fate? She asked at one point. There was a thoughtful silence. On the line. I used to think it was just a word people used when they didn't have answers, he said. But maybe fate is just timing. The right person picking up the wrong call. That line stayed with her long after they said goodnight. When Zara finally hung up reluctantly, it was 2:04 a.m. She stared at her call log, at the unfamiliar number saved as Adil wrong number, and smiled. She didn't know what it was. A coincidence, maybe. A passing conversation with a stranger. But something about it felt like more. Adil, lying on his side miles away, stared at his phone too. He had been about to silence it that night. He wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone, but something made him answer. And now, her voice lingered in his head, like a favorite song you hum without realizing. Neither of them could explain it, but sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings don't make sense. They just feel right. And this one, whatever it was, felt like the start of something quietly extraordinary. Sometimes the deepest connections are built between two hearts in the dark. It became a habit, no, a ritual, every night. Sometime between PM and AM, Zara's phone would light up. Sometimes it was a message. Sometimes it was a call. But it was always him, and she always answered. What started with a wrong number was now the most right thing in her life. They talked about everything and nothing. The kind of nothings that somehow made everything better. From the silly things like how Adil hated pineapple on pizza and how Zara still cried during animated movies to the profound, like childhood scars and secret dreams they'd never dared to say out loud before. Zara told him about her mother's perfume, the one scent that still made her feel safe. She told him about her fear of losing people, of becoming forgettable in a world that moved too fast. She didn't cry, but her voice trembled, and he listened with the kind of silence that makes someone feel seen. Adil shared stories about his late-night walks, about the time his father taught him how to ride a bicycle and didn't let go until Adil was already flying. He spoke of quiet regrets and louder hopes, of how he always felt something was missing, until now when his nights had her voice in them. They never said, I like you, not yet, but it was there. In the way she'd pause, waiting for his reaction to a memory she never told anyone else. In the way he'd stay on the call, even when the silence stretched, just to be near her breathing. I don't even know what you look like, she whispered once, lying in bed, her eyes tracing patterns on the ceiling. Maybe that's what makes this real, he replied gently. You like me for the parts no one sees, and she did. She liked how he laughed from the chest, not just the throat. She liked how he never interrupted, how he asked about her day and remembered what she told him the night before, how his voice dropped lower when he was nervous and higher when he was excited. She liked how talking to him made her feel like the most interesting version of herself, and a deal. He liked how she didn't rush to fill silences, how she could go from philosophical to sarcastic in a heartbeat, how her voice softened when she talked about books and sparkled when she described a memory. He liked how she saw the world in metaphors, like everything had a hidden meaning and he wanted to uncover each one with her. One night, the clock ticked past 3 a.m. "Why haven't we met yet?" Zara asked, not accusingly, just curious. "Because," he said after a beat, "if meeting you in voice feels this magical, I'm afraid seeing you might make it to real." She smiled into the darkness. "Maybe real is what we need." They didn't fix a date. They didn't rush it, because whatever this was, it wasn't rushed. It was unfolding the way rain seeps into the soil, quietly, patiently, turning something dry into something alive. And in the stillness of those midnight hours, something was blooming between them, something wordless, something real. Some moments don't need words. Just one look and something eternal begins. It was raining that day, not the dramatic kind, just soft, rhythmic drops sliding down calf windows like nature was holding its breath too. Zara reached the little calf first. She was early, not because she was impatient but because she was scared of being late to a moment she'd been replaying in her mind for weeks. She wore a simple beige sweater, a faint rose shade on her lips, and carried more butterflies than she'd ever known she could. Her heart wasn't beating, it was drumming. Inside the calf, warmth hugged her like an old friend. Soft jazz played in the background, cups clinked gently, conversations whispered around her, but nothing settled. The storm inside. She chose the table by the window, the one with a view of the rainy street, hoping, wondering, praying this wouldn't be the moment everything changed, or the one where it all slipped away. A deal arrived 5 minutes later, soaked, slightly, breathless and searching, and then it happened. Their eyes found each other. Zara stood up. Adil froze for a heartbeat. No smiles yet, just a quiet recognition that passed between them like a secret wind. He took a step forward, then another until they were standing face to face for the first time, and in that moment, the world felt still. The clatter of cups, the murmur of voices, even the soft jazz all faded. It was as if the universe had taken a breath and decided to let time pause. Zara didn't need to speak. Neither did Adil. That one look said everything their words had in single quotes. It said, "I know you. I've known you for lifetimes I've never lived. You're the voice I've whispered to in the dark, the echo I waited for, the feeling I couldn't name until now." He smiled first, nervously, genuinely. "Hi," he whispered, like a word spoken too loud would break the magic. "Hi," she replied, her voice soft but steady. They sat, and everything that was once imagined, everything they had dreamt or feared settled into place, like puzzle pieces clicking into the frame of reality. He noticed the way her fingers danced around the rim of the coffee cup. She noticed how he leaned forward when he listened, really listened. The conversations flowed, but the silences in between spoke louder. Eyes met often. Smiles came easily. At one point, the waitress arrived, took their orders, and left, but they barely noticed her. Zara looked outside at the rain, then back at him. "It's strange," she said. "I've known you for weeks. And yet, this feels like a beginning," he finished. She nodded. By the time the sky cleared and the city started breathing again, they were still there, still seated at the same corner table. Two strangers, now stitched together by midnight calls and a single glance that changed everything. As they stepped outside, the last few drops of rain kissed their shoulders. Adil turned to her. "I don't know what this is, but I know I don't want to lose it." Zara didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, took his hand gently, and whispered, "Then don't." And in that touch and that fleeting, trembling connection was the promise of something neither of them fully understood yet, but already believed in. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something deeper. It was recognition. There wasn't a plan, no promises, no expectations, no daily texts, just a rhythm that emerged quietly like the way dawn knows how to show up without needing an alarm. Arif and Eamon began to cross paths more often. Some would call it coincidence. Others would say it was fate stretching its fingers quietly across the hours. Whatever it was, it felt effortless. The library became a quiet sanctuary. They both drifted into sometimes at the same time, sometimes not. He'd sit in the back corner, sketchbook open, pencil dancing across the pages with calm purpose. She'd settle into a chair near the poetry section, a mug of cinnamon tea beside her, flipping pages slowly like every word mattered. They rarely spoke there. Words would have only distracted from the presence they shared, and sometimes presence is louder than conversation. Once, Arav glanced up from a drawing and saw Eamon smiling softly at a line in a book. He didn't ask what it was. Instead, he captured that moment, the curve of her lips, the way the light hit her face, the way her eyelashes flickered like they were listening to the silence. He sketched her without thinking. He always did. He had pages of her now laughing, thinking, reading, walking. None of them perfect, but all of them real. She had unknowingly become his muse, the stillness in his storm. One late afternoon, they found themselves sharing a bench in the park, both facing the slow sunset. Arav had his sketch pad open again, but this time, Eamon leaned over. "Do you always draw people you barely know?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Only when I wish I knew them more." She fell silent, but the air around them was thick with something unspoken. The next day, he found a note slipped into his sketchbook. Small, handwritten, folded twice. No name, no explanation. He opened it. Taped inside was a miniature version of one of his sketches, the one of her reading in the library. Beneath it, in soft cursive, "I kept this. I hope you don't mind." He smiled. He didn't mind at all. They started walking more after that. Evening walks under banyan trees, leaves rustling like secrets being passed above. Sometimes they talked about books, sometimes about childhood, memories, but often they just walked, matching each other's pace, letting the city blur around them. One night, Eamon handed him a bookmark made of dried jasmine flowers, carefully pressed and wrapped in clear lamination. "For your sketchbook," she said simply. Arav took it gently, running his fingers over it like it was the most fragile thing in the world. "Why jasmine?" he asked. "Because it's the flower that blooms after dusk," she said, smiling. Quiet, gentle, just like. She didn't finish the sentence. But she didn't need to. He knew .it was her. .it was them. Their connection wasn't loud. It wasn't filled with dramatic declarations or big, sweeping moments. It was silent glances and half smiles. It was two people sitting close enough to feel each other's warmth, even when the world around them was cold. Arav had always believed love needed to be chased, fought for, earned. But with Eamon, it was different. It wasn't a war. It was a gentle unfolding like petals in morning light, and somewhere between a library aisle, a park bench, and the soft press of jasmine petals, Arav realized he was falling, not fast, not hard, but deeply. And the best part, so was she. Love didn't leave, but something else did. The courage to hold on. It didn't end with a goodbye. It ended with a delay, a message left unread, a missed call no one returned. Adil's job offer came unexpectedly, a creative director role in Dubai, the kind of opportunity most people dream of. It was everything he'd worked for, everything he thought he wanted. And yet, when he looked at Zara that evening over coffee, he couldn't find the right way to say it. She smiled through the ache, trying to be proud, supportive, strong. "That's amazing," she said, forcing excitement into her voice, but her fingers trembled around the cup. Adil noticed. He always did, but he didn't say anything. Because how could he? How do you ask someone to wait for you when you don't even know what you're walking into? "They promised to stay close. We'll talk every day," he said. "I'll call you before bed." She smiled, but life had other plans. The first few weeks, they kept their promise. Late night calls, photos of the sky they missed under, voice notes filled with nostalgia and soft "I miss you"s. But slowly, time zones became excuses. Work got busy. Zara had her own responsibilities, her own silences to carry. Text replies turned into blue ticks. Phone calls became shorter, then fewer, then none. And in that space between one missed message and the next, things began to change. Zara started to doubt, was she holding on too tightly to someone who wasn't reaching back? Adil, meanwhile, stared at her contact name every night, thumb hovering over the call button. But he couldn't bring himself to press it. He was tired, confused, drowning in a new city, in meetings, in deadlines. And the weight of unspoken feelings only added to the exhaustion. They both still loved each other, but the noise of life, the chaos of uncertainty, the ache of distance, the fear of being too much or not enough drowned that love slowly. Neither of them said it, but both felt it, the shift, the ache, the silence. One afternoon, Zara visited their favorite cafe alone. The seat across from her felt like a memory. She stared at her phone screen, no new messages. She wanted to call him to ask if they were okay. But what if he didn't answer? What if the silence spoke louder than his voice? That evening, Adil sat in his apartment, scrolling through their old pictures, screenshots of texts, blurry selfies, her sending him voice notes of songs he hadn't heard before. He missed her voice. He missed her. But he didn't know how to bridge the gap anymore. He thought she was moving on. She thought he already had. And so, they both stayed silent, not because they stopped caring, but because they cared so deeply. They didn't know how to fix what they couldn't name. Love was still there, tucked into memories, in playlists they both still listened to, in unfinished conversations they kept rehearsing in their heads. But now, it was surrounded by walls. Walls of fear, walls of pride, walls made from every unsent message and every second guess. They weren't over, but they were lost. And sometimes the hardest thing about love isn't losing it, it's losing your way back to it. Some stories don't need a perfect beginning, just a second chance. The music played softly in the background, a familiar melody drifting through the warm night air. Fairy lights dangled from the trees, casting a golden glow on everything beneath. Laughter echoed from all corners of the wedding venue. Glasses clinked, people danced, memories were being made. And then, Zara saw him, across the lawn, in a navy blue suit, standing beneath a string of lights that seemed to flicker just for him. Adil. Their eyes met, just for a moment. But that moment stretched beyond time, beyond the months they'd lost, beyond the silences they couldn't fill. Zara's heart stopped, not in panic, but in the quiet recognition of something once hers. Maybe still hers. Adil didn't move, neither did she, but something between them did. The distance that had grown so vast, so heavy, now seemed paper thin, fragile, ready to be broken. He took a step forward. So did she, and by the time they stood just a breath apart, there were no words, none needed. The silence said everything. "Hi," he finally whispered, his voice low, unsure. She nodded, eyes glistening. "Hi." They didn't talk about the months they hadn't spoken, or the nights filled with almost texts, or the moments where they both stood on the edge of reaching out but didn't. Instead, they walked, away from the crowd, away from the music and laughter, under the stars. The grass was damp with dew, the sky clear. The universe, it seemed, had planned this. They found a bench near the old fountain, the same kind they used to sit on, back when everything was new and unspoken. For a while, they said nothing, until Adil finally spoke. "I thought about calling you every day. I waited for that call," Zara replied, her voice a whisper. He looked down, fingers fumbling. "I was scared." "So was I," she said, a pause, then a smile, bittersweet, soft, and then the floodgates opened. They talked about everything. About how he felt lost in a new city. About how she felt like she was holding on to someone already gone. About all the almost, the nearly said words, the unsent messages, the fear of not being enough. They talked about the cafe she still visited, the songs he still listened to, about how love never really left. It just waited. "I didn't stop caring," he said, eyes on hers. "I know," she replied. The night deepened. The stars shone brighter, and for the first time in months, they breathed in sync. Adil reached out, gently taking her hand. Her fingers curled into his like they never left. And then, almost too softly for the world to hear, he said, "We were always meant to be, weren't we?" Zara blinked, a tear escaping down her cheek, not of sadness, but of relief. "Yes," she whispered, "even when we didn't know it." They didn't kiss that night. They didn't need to, because some connections go deeper than skin. They live in the spaces between words, in the stillness of two hearts remembering how to beat together. That night, under the stars, they began again. Not where they left off, but somewhere better, somewhere real. Love isn't just found, it's chosen, every single day. The days that followed weren't filled with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. There were no fireworks, no sweeping declarations beneath city lights. What Zara and Adil had now was something quieter, gentler, steadier, something real. They started over not from scratch, but from truth. There were still moments of hesitation. Times when memories of their silence crept in like shadows. But they had learned now. Love didn't mean never falling. It meant holding each other up when they did. Every morning, Adil would send a simple message. Good morning, sunshine. And every night, Zara would reply, home safe? Little things. But love lived in them. They didn't try to be perfect anymore. They fought sometimes about work stress, about forgotten calls, about misunderstood silences. But now, they stayed. They didn't walk away when it got hard, because this time, they had chosen to stay. One evening, they sat together in a small cafe, the same one where they first met. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and the world outside was a blur of lights and mist. Adil sipped his coffee, watching her read. Zara wasn't saying much, but he had learned to understand her silences. She smiled slightly as she flipped the page, her fingers brushing the rim of her cup absent-mindedly. He leaned back and whispered, I like us like this. She looked up, brows raised playfully. Like what? Quiet, calm, sure. Zara reached out, threading her fingers through his. Me too. That night, he walked her home. No umbrella, just the rain and their laughter echoing through the empty streets. And when he dropped her off, he didn't say goodbye. He said, see you tomorrow. Because now, there would always be a tomorrow. They built a rhythm. A life not of dramatic highs and lows, but of steady love. Grocery runs, late night walks, movies half watched because they were too busy talking. There was a comfort in the mundane in knowing that even in silence, they were understood. Even in distance, they were held. And as weeks turned to months, people asked, so are you too? Official? Zara would smile and say, we're more than that. Because what they had wasn't just a title. It was a decision made in small ways. Everyday.to forgive.to stay.to love. Not just in the big moments, but in the quiet ones, too. One evening, under a golden sky, Adil turned to her and asked, do you ever think about how it all started? One wrong number? Zara laughed softly. It was the right mistake. He nodded. The best kind. They sat in that silence. The kind they once feared, now filled with peace, and in that stillness, Adil whispered, you're my home. Zara didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply leaned her head on his shoulder and said, and you're mine. Because in the end, love wasn't fireworks. It wasn't chaos. It was waking up and choosing someone not despite the flaws, but because of them. It was standing beside someone, even when the world pulled in different directions. It was patience. It was effort. It was Zara and Adil, imperfect, but real, and chosen every single day.